Hi everyone, today I'm talking to Chris Dolman, fellow actuary and great leader. Chris is an actuary working at IAG, and in his current role as Executive Manager, Data and Algorithmic Ethics, he helps to ensure that modern decision-making algorithms and other advanced uses of data are designed and implemented in an ethical, responsible and thoughtful way. Prior to this, Chris has held corporate and consulting actuarial roles both here in Australia and in the UK. He's an award-winning volunteer, a researcher, and he's a Gradient Institute Fellow. Chris, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
It's wonderful to have a chat. I love that we can do this over Zoom and have a bit of a chat about your career and how you've come into the role that you're in now. So, Chris, let's start with that. Can you tell us a little bit about your current role and your career to date?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll sort of go through my career and get to where I'm at because the story is a bit of an odd one, perhaps. So,
okay.
I mean, I sort of fell into actuarial work, which Australians always find a bit unusual because over here you sort of have to decide here to be an actuary when you're about 16, right? When you're sort of going through HSC and what have you. And at least when I sort of got into it in the UK, it wasn't really like that. I don't know if that's changed since. So I did a maths degree, did a master's degree, was sort of going down the academic track, and then worked out I could probably earn a lot more money not doing that. And so sort of looked at industry and tried to work out what to do with these maths degrees I'd got. And my flatmate at the time suggested actuarial as a potential thing. And I had a look and thought, oh, that kind of looks interesting enough. Give that a go. Applied to a few jobs, got one, and thought to myself, well, I'll give that a go and see what happens. And I haven't really looked back. So it wasn't this really sort of long decision-making process that a lot of people here have. It was a very almost spur of the moment thing. But you know, very glad I did.
Yeah, so you did your maths degree and you sort of did a whole lot of other sort of, foundational type courses and basically took the long way to becoming an actuary, as we maybe say here, because, we all start straight out of uni, but you've taken a much longer route to get there, and then here you are.
Yeah, although in the UK that was pretty much the common route at the time.
The normal way.
Yeah, that's right. There's not really the sort of actuarial degrees, right? So,
right.
So that first role was in consulting, in GI consulting mainly, although there were bits and pieces outside of that. So really, it was just seizing opportunities and doing lots of different things and exploring what I enjoyed and what I didn't about actuarial work. So I did that for a few years. That gave me the opportunity to come over here to Australia, which was great. I got a little secondment, and on that secondment, I bumped into a nice young lady in the pub who I'm now married to. So that inevitably at some point meant I was going to move here, which happened a few years later. So I've sort of taken advantage of portability, which a lot of actuaries don't really appreciate until they have to do it, but it's quite unusual how portable the professional qualification is. Like I know a lot of other people who do other sorts of jobs, and it's a lot harder to move around the world than it is as an actuary in some professions. So we are quite privileged to have that. And so yeah, I moved here, did my last two IFOA exams, I think the week or 2 weeks after I landed, passed them, qualified, and then immediately left the IFOA and moved to the Australian Institute. So, so that
global recognition.
Yeah,
that portability, that global recognition of the qualification means you can move around and you don't have to redo exams. You can just.
That's right, and you can just practice for a year and then port over or whatever it is locally. It's some rule like that usually, and so that's super valuable. So. In that move, I thought I've done consulting for a while. I'll go and work in industry for a while and sort of see the other side of the fence, if you like. So IAG gave me a role, which was, very fortunate. I had something to move to, and I've been at IAG ever since, which again, possibly wasn't the original plan. It was just sort of something that's happened over time. But it probably says a lot about how good the company has been to work for. So there's always been interesting things to do, and I've had lots of opportunities to develop. So yeah, did all the sort of traditional actuarial jobs, I guess you might do in an insurance company, did a bit in reserving, got involved in strategy projects and things like that, did a bit of portfolio management, and then went into this analytics AI area quite a while ago now. It was probably around 2015, 2014-ish that we sort of started up that area. So that was a really good time. So I got to build the sort of data science team that was doing like non-pricing stuff. And then, yeah, in the end, got to run a large team there, and then over time moved into my current role. So that's me, basically.
Wow, what an interesting path, and what an interesting role that you are in now. So you've done all the traditional actuarial roles, both as a consultant and as working for an insurance company, but now, you know, those of you that follow you on social media know you as like the responsible AI guy. I mean, actuaries in AI, we sometimes we're talking about it, but not many of us have actually worked in that space. Like, can you tell me a bit more about how you found yourself working in AI and having this sort of different focus outside sort of just traditional actuarial work of reserving and pricing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I take a very broad sort of definition of AI, right? But I don't get too hung up on the argument that lots of people like to have about whether things are AI or not. So I think insurance companies have, in my mind, done AI stuff for a long time, right? Your pricing systems are driven by statistical models that you build that you then implement in some way, either in sort of traditional tables or more modern software if you've got that. And so if you take the EU's definition of AI in their upcoming AI Act, that's a draft at the moment, that's definitely an AI system. Other people will argue it's not because it doesn't include deep learning, but yeah, whatever. So I think a lot
definition.
Yeah, so a lot of actuaries, the work they do actually falls into that broad definition of AI, but they get often quite narrow in the tasks that they apply that to. So sort of pricing, reserving, maybe a few other things, but there's tons of other decisions that insurance companies make every day that models can be applied to. And so
can you give us an example?
Yeah, so like who should you send marketing to is a common early one that people look at, right? So obviously your marketing team's going to have views about that, but potentially you can build models to learn from previous campaigns, sort of what's worked and what's not, and for whom. And so you can maybe target that marketing towards people who are going to respond to it and not to people who aren't going to respond to it. So there's a sort of cost efficiency to be gained there, or effectiveness, if you like. So that's often an early project that people sort of look at in the AI space. And again, that doesn't necessarily need to be rocket science in terms of modeling. That can be quite simple stuff, although you can do complicated stuff if you want to. We've been doing things in claims. So again, it's fairly simple conceptually. So just trying to improve the claims experience for customers. So the project we published a paper on a couple of years ago at the Actuaries Summit just looked at that. And it's basically a message that gets sent to people during claims to tell them whether or not their car's likely to be a total loss. Not a final decision. It's just from what you've said so far, we haven't even looked at the car yet, but you've said in your message to us when lodging the claim that it looks pretty bad. And from what you've said, that sounds like a total loss claim. And so, yeah, we can send messages like that automatically without humans being involved. So you can do that a lot quicker, obviously. So these sorts of things can be really valuable and helpful, and don't necessarily need to involve sort of rocket science, but definitely fall under the AI banner, if you like. So yeah, so I kind of set up the team at IAG that started doing these sorts of things. And then it was probably around 2016, 2017-ish, after I'd been doing that for a little while, I started getting a lot more conscious of some of the risks involved and looked around for like guidance on sort of AI failings and how to sort of manage that. And there really wasn't a lot at that time in the world. There was sort of some stuff on model risk management, which had been published, but that was mainly on the sort of technical side, making sure your models are sort of robust, not necessarily are you doing something that's legitimate and fair and reasonable.
Not that sort of ethics and that responsible side of things as well. Not taking it to that level.
That's right. And there was loads of news stories around that time. This was just before Cambridge Analytica as well, which really blew the whole thing up. But there were still news stories coming out fairly regularly about like AI going wrong. And so I thought, well, there probably needs to be some activity there, and someone needs to both internally in big companies help big companies work out how to deal with that issue. And then also just generally in the market, there needs to be better guidance and more discussion of these sorts of issues. And so I kind of carved that niche out for myself, I guess. So which has been interesting for, you know, the last 4 years, and hopefully will be for a lot longer. I think when I started doing that, I thought it was a bit of an experiment. I thought it sounds interesting enough. There's probably a lot to be done. No idea if this is going to be anything with longevity. But I sort of flippantly said to people, you know, in 5 years' time, everyone's going to need someone doing this role internally. It's going to be that important. And so, you know, 4 years on, well, there's a lot more Chris Dolmans in the market than there were when I started. So that's good. I don't think everyone's yet got an ethics team focused on this topic, but there's a lot more big companies especially seem to have done. So that's nice to see.
How exciting to be leading the charge and being involved right from the start with this. You know, sometimes the most impactful and innovative things that we can do, we doubt ourselves to start with because we think, oh my gosh, nobody else is doing this, or why isn't this here? Or we see that opportunity, but sometimes it can take a while for people to get on board. And as things evolve, you know, other companies see that need, and you know, it grows. What an interesting evolution that you've had over the last 5 or 6 years, from sort of seeing the need and you know, building out what needs to be done there to where you're at now.
Yeah, it's been really, really interesting work, and I think it's some of the more valuable work I've done outside of the day job for you know, my whole life. So that's been great.
That's fantastic. How interesting. So speaking of your day job, Chris, I also know that you've worked part-time for a little while now, and really interested to hear what prompted that decision to go part-time and what you found is helpful. I know in the past when I've worked part-time, I found it hard to make it work or hard to juggle it, and keen to get your tips on how people can make that work.
Yeah, so I started working a 4-day week. I think it was in 2017. It might have been 2018, but around that time anyway. And really, I was finding that balancing work and my family life and other things outside of work was just getting too tricky. So I sort of got to a point where there was a choice to be made that you either sort of stay on that treadmill and just get burnt out, or you try and make some changes. And so as a bit of an experiment, we sort of agreed as a family that I'd try working 4 days a week, and we'll see how that goes. And IAG supported that, which was great. And I really haven't looked back. So it's been great for me. And I reckon my productivity's gone up, which is interesting. But if you look at some of the studies that have been done around the world about 4-day weeks, that seems to be what happens. Because what you find is, and you see it actually when you start working part-time, you notice it in other people, is that people will sort of fit other things into the working week, right? You know, like, for example, tomorrow I've got to take my dogs to the vet to have something done. And so that's my day off, and I can just do that on my day off, and it's easy. Whereas if I was working full time, I'd be trying to fit that around my day job.
Squeeze it in.
And it just sort of gets in the way and distracts you from your work. So I like to be, when I'm working, I'm focused on working, and that's it. And then when I'm not, I can switch off rather than trying to blend all this stuff together.
So your work days aren't punctuated with other things that you're trying to fit into your week, like taking the dogs to the vet. Your work days are just focused on getting your work done because you know that you can take the dogs to the vet on the day off, and
that's right.
And it's more productive when you're at work.
That's right. And I just think it means you can be more focused on work when you're doing it. I mean, I'm one of those people who can be quite full on sometimes. So I go sort of, you know, 120%. Like I don't really do sort of half effort kind of hanging around having a coffee. I just like to get things done. So I find it's helpful just to be able to focus on that and then move off and do something else.
So you can stay in work mode and just get through it all, and really pump it all out. Yeah,
that's right. And I mean, if you think about it, sort of full-time 9 to 5, 5 days a week, or whatever you want to call it, it's quite archaic, right? We sort of developed that in like the almost industrial age, when it was like factories and things like that. And there's no real reason for knowledge workers to work in that way. I mean, some people want to work more than that, some people want to work less than that, and we should just try and support people to live the lives they want to. So for me, 4 days a week and then 3 days off to do other things is a good balance. So long may it continue.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's a really productive solution for you, and no doubt IAG gets more out of you working 4 days a week, or than if they, well, more than 80% of full time, I guess.
Well, I reckon, yeah. I haven't measured it robustly, though, I should say. It's more of a sense that I have, but yeah.
I'm sure you can design an algorithm to estimate productivity and check that, do some scenario analysis.
That's right.
So, but I mean, I absolutely hear you. When I've worked part time, I've felt sometimes like I'm fitting 5 days worth of work into 4. Then you just feel like you're working full time on a pay cut. So I'm curious to hear, because you've been able to do this for quite some time now. Like, what do you find is important to actually making it work and being successful in doing that?
Yeah, well, maybe I am working a full-time job with a pay cut. I don't know, but I'm okay with that, right? So that's just sort of it's worked okay for me. I think it's really about personal time management, and you have to be a lot more strict with yourself when you've got sort of less time in the week to fit things in. So I've just gotten a lot better at saying no to things. So then I was one of those typical people, you come from a sort of high achieving sort of path that you've been on, and you just say yes to everything, right? Because there's interesting things to be done, and that's right. You take things on and you back yourself to do it, and you just keep gathering things to do. And you can't do that if you can't fit it all in. And so you've got to start learning how to say no to things, and especially if it sort of eats into your days off, you've got to be quite strict about that. So I will sort of shuffle my day off occasionally if there's something super important on my usual Friday. But that's a rarity. It's just, sometimes there's like board meetings or things like that where you just can't avoid them.
Can't avoid them. Yeah. But as a general rule, you wouldn't do that. You'd rather just say no to something. Yeah.
That's right.
Can you give me an example of how you would do that? Because sometimes we find it, the concept of saying no to things kind of makes sense, but what kind of words would you use, or have you had a recent example where you've had to turn something down, or decline an option to do something on a Friday? How would you respond to it?
It depends on what it is. I think you've got to, but most of the time when people try and sort of set meetings up when you're not around, it's just general ignorance that that's your day off. It's not that they're trying to
don't know.
They just don't know. And so just a, reminder, oh, by the way, I don't work on Fridays, so can we do it another time? And people will usually accommodate that. But it's not, I'm not always declining for that reason, though. Sometimes it's like genuinely, actually, I don't need to be involved in that. And so that's just a useful skill for anyone, right? So when you get a meeting request, like, do you actually need to do that? Or is it something you can say no to? And there's no real rules around that. I think you just have to practice it and see what works for you. But I found people to be generally pretty accepting of that. One thing I've also noticed, and you're sort of aware of it when you work full time, but you're more aware of it when it, personally impacts you, is like regularly occurring meetings. So it doesn't matter so much if it's like 5 people, because you can all sort of agree on what day's best for that group of 5 people. But as soon as you get to like town hall type meetings, if you always have your town hall meeting on a Friday, then the person who doesn't work on Friday literally never comes to
always misses out.
That's right. So you've got to start rotating days and rotating times to make things accessible once it gets to a certain size. And I think that was something that really struck me when it started affecting me, right? I hadn't really ever had it pointed out to me before.
You hadn't thought about it. Yeah.
but it affects a lot of people. So I've really become a bit of an advocate for just flexibility and like regular meetings like that. Like when I see the town hall meeting always on a Friday, or I'm just like, oh, let's rotate it. So at least then everyone gets to, attend sometimes. And again, when you point these things out, people aren't doing it to be rude. They just genuinely haven't thought about it. Yeah, that's right. And so I found generally people are accommodating. So and then really appreciative of like you telling them, because a lot of people just won't point it out and just sit there being annoyed.
And just stew about it. Yeah.
That's right. But I don't do that. I always point things out. So yeah.
And that pays off, because that benefits not just you in your situation, but it benefits everyone around you. So it's a great quality in leaders to be able to do that. So that clear communication and, calling out those things that people aren't necessarily doing them to, annoy people, but just they probably haven't thought about how else they could do it.
That's right. That's right. I mean, if you've never had someone in your team work part-time and you've always managed full-time people, you've never had to think about it, right? So it's not something you've ever thought about. So it takes someone to point it out to you, unfortunately. That's just how life is.
That's right. We learn from each other, don't we? So okay. So you've been a leader for a long time now. I'm really curious, because a lot of actuaries find it challenging to make that first step into a people management role, so focused on our exams, so focused on building our technical skills, that stepping into those sorts of roles that you're talking about, where you've got to think about other people and their different working arrangements. That can be a real challenge. So I'm curious to hear from you, Chris, what your top tip is for actuaries who are stepping into their first management roles.
Well, I think my top tip is just to accept that it's a skill like any other that you need to learn. And so a lot of people, when they sort of first enter into that sort of position, they haven't quite grasped that. They sort of get it intellectually, but they probably haven't quite grasped how much there is to learn. Certainly that was probably true of me. And so you're sort of back to the start again in terms of your education on that particular topic. You've become a technical expert on a few things. And now you have to accept in your mind, you're not an expert anymore on this new thing you've taken on. You're now the novice and you have a lot to learn. And so you need to, go on courses, learn from other people, get mentors, all of these things that you sort of intellectually know you have to do to grow skills. You've got to do that again in this new area. And it's a different type of skill to your technical skills that you'll have been building most of your life. So it might be a bit harder because you haven't learned how to learn that.
Yeah, it's a different kind of skill to learn, isn't it? And a whole new skill set too. And right. not a clearly defined path of what you need to do. We go through our actuarial exams where it's clearly laid out in front of us what we have to do next, which exam we have to pass next. But there's no curriculum for becoming a manager. There's that whole new skill set that we've got to learn and figure out how to do it. So how did you make that transition? What did you find was helpful at the time? Did you have good mentors to learn from, or something else?
I did, and mostly what I did was I focused on other people I'd either worked with in the past or that I had around me at the time, and I focused on things that I could see that they were doing that I thought were good, and things that I could see that they were doing that I thought weren't so good, and just in myself tried to work out how I could do the good things and not the bad things. And I certainly don't think I did that perfectly, but there's a lot you can learn from just observing other people in this sort of environment. So yeah, that's obviously a lot easier when we were all in offices, and probably a bit harder now.
True.
So yeah.
Yes, but yeah, absolutely. It is harder when you're not physically sort of being able to observe some of those things that you're not directly involved in.
Yeah, so that was quite useful for me, and obviously IT is a big company. There's development courses and things like that I had the opportunity to do, which was also very helpful. So if those things exist in your employer, go and take advantage of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Chris, it's been great to hear from you today. I've loved hearing about your interesting journey to becoming the Executive Manager Data Algorithmic Ethics today and the work that you're doing as well. I loved your broad definition of AI and thinking about how, just that control cycle approach of, taking in information and making changes in the future can do things like improve the experience for our customers and improve the process for people. There's so many opportunities that we can apply that there, and that it's not just about model risk, it's about understanding ethics and what the right thing is to do, and so much more that we all need to think about as we embed more and more AI processes into our workplaces and our lives. Really enjoyed hearing. Yeah.
It's been great to chat. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries at all. Thank you so much for sharing your insights also around working part-time and flexible work arrangements, and your top tips for actuaries stepping into management roles. So it's been great chatting with you this morning. Thanks so much for sharing your insights with us, Chris.
Thank you.